As we start this lesson, I want to note that I am approaching explanation from the case where enough of your audience is not familiar with the key points to be motivated to action. However, it is always important to understand your audience while developing your message. A more advanced audience will be more interested in how to take action versus why action needs to be taken. Now, in parts 2 and 3, you learned about a number of obstacles to success and how people perceive messages based on their own experiences and decision-making skills. So how do we work with and around these obstacles to be more effective? As mentioned in some of the earlier segments, the goal is to make clear to our audience why we are discussing a subject with the intention that they can understand why you are asking for action. We can start by making a few statements that are factual and not controversial. This will build confidence in our audience. So, for example, in a meeting to persuade participants to consider flood mitigation measures, we can all agree to these 5 points. First, floods are serious natural hazards. 2, floods can come either from intensive storms, snowmelt, or levee breach. 3, the Army Corps has a mandate to help communicate flood risk to communities. 4, flood risk mitigation works when communities understand their exposure, the source of that information, and then lead the decision-making process. And 5, the Army Corps needs help to communicate these risks with people who are vulnerable. These statements first create an initial step that can be understood with confidence and not any complicated language. Second, they frame the direction of the explanation. It's about community safety, risk analysis, and planning. And finally, it creates a foundation for future ideas. Once we have built confidence, we can improve your audience's understanding. You can use the single strongest communication method ever created. That's storytelling. This helps information stick in your brain more effectively. It brings information to life. So you could factually say, you have a 1% chance of a storm every year, which may result in flood water reaching or overtopping the base flood elevation. So just being near but not inside this line doesn't completely remove your risk of flood. And those are the facts. And the facts provide substance. It's a story that provides meaning. So let's look at this in terms of a story. Now meet Becky. Her house in suburban Atlanta flooded a few years back during a week of bad storms. She lost everything on the ground floor. The furniture, kitchen, clothes, carpet, all the drywall had to come out. Worst of all, she didn't have flood insurance because she wasn't technically in the floodplain, even though many of her neighbors had opted in themselves. That means she had to rely on volunteers to clean out her house, rent an apartment while it was unlivable, and finally pay for all the rehabilitation herself. Becky thought that her homeowner's insurance covered flood. It doesn't, and she learned this the most awful way possible. So you think, great, but I am not the type that can tell stories. Well, there's a belief that good storytelling is mythical. It is the quest of a great hero that must slay dragons while overcoming great adversity. It doesn't need to be. It can be short and sweet. It is presenting facts through the lens of a person's experience. Another good reason you can use stories is that they already exist for your use if you're working on flood risk. Check out Core Risk Analysis Gateway.us. Check Toolbox under Communication, and then Case Studies and Testimonials. Now, one more possibility in a good complementary technique is to find connections with something that is both similar and familiar. A connection says, you know how this works, right? Well, this thing over here is very similar to that. So let's look at flood in relation to car insurance. A person buys car insurance, in case their car gets damaged despite all the effort that has already gone into accident prevention. These include driver's training, stoplights, street signs, barriers, accident avoidance systems, anti-lock braking, and the list goes on. Using these advances, we have greatly reduced your driving risk. However, accidents still happen because, though we can understand a driver's behavior, it's not perfect. Much like floods, we have built dams and levees, relocated populations, and all after significant study and experience. We have greatly reduced the loss of life and damage as a result. However, we cannot completely eliminate this risk either. So think of connections as a way to use an analogy that can connect a new idea to something somebody already understands. It's a great starting point if the big idea still isn't clear. So we have learned a few ways to approach some time-tested tools to structure and improve confidence and understanding of the audience. We can confer important explanations by first establishing a few uncontroversial statements that set a scene. Then we can use storytelling and our connections to increase understanding. We are pulling our listeners from why it is important to how can they be part of the solution and response.